In this video, we will talk about phonological awareness. As you remember, language refers to oral language. So we have spoken words, the form of spoken words, mapping onto their meaning. And written language is kind of grafted onto this spoken language knowledge that you already have. In a slightly more detailed image, receptive oral language concerns a series of steps of processes that operate on oral language representations at different levels, such as phonemes and phonological word forms. And learning to read is attaching some new processes onto these pre-existing ones that concern the identification of letters, letter groups, and how they map onto phonemes, and also learning the orthographic word forms, that is, known letter sequences, and how they map onto the known phonological word forms of the spoken language. So if we focus on this spoken language part, we have the notion of phonology. Phonology concerns a domain of language and a branch of linguistics. We will give a very simplified view of what phonology is. In essence, when we talk about phonology, we are referring to the sounds of language and to their articulation in speech production. So these sounds of language, called phonemes, are elementary units, so they cannot get any smaller. They're not composed of smaller parts, and they have no meaning in themselves. Speech sounds have no meaning, but they do combine to form syllables and words, and the words have meaning. Phonological structure refers to the regularities in how the phonemes can combine. So groups of phonemes can make up syllables, and there are very important restrictions on what kinds of phoneme groups can form a syllable in a given language. Phonotactics is another term that refers to restrictions in the sequences of phonemes that are allowed within a language. Phonological phenomena refer to effects on speech sounds and their structure when they are found together within a word or across words. For example, in Norwegian, there are extensive phonological phenomena around the sound before other consonant sounds, and of course, many others. Knowledge of phonology develops with language experience and is part of one's language knowledge, of one's native language ability. And most preschoolers have already mastered most of their language's phonology by the time they begin school. This means that they're able to talk properly, producing most sounds correctly, and they also perceive language properly by attending to the important differences in speech sounds in their native language. Very importantly, when we talk about knowledge of phonology, we are talking about implicit knowledge. Implicit knowledge means knowing how to do something, not knowing about it. So when we say that children have mastered most of their language's phonology by the time they enter school, we don't mean that children can talk about their language or about their phonology. We mean they can speak properly. So they demonstrate proper usage of the phonology of their language by being able to articulate the words and by being able to perceive the words others are saying. So knowledge of phonology in this sense is the ability or the linguistic skill of using the speech sound structure to communicate. In contrast to the linguistic skill of mastering one's phonology, there are several meta-linguistic skills. When we say meta in such a word, we mean about or over. So in this case, about language. What is a meta-linguistic skill? Well, a linguistic skill is skill in using language for the purpose of communication. That's why we have language. So linguistic skills concern language use. In contrast, metalinguistic skills are about language. So they are about the conscious manipulation of linguistic objects in non-communicative ways. A simpler way to say this is that metalinguistic skill is skill in playing with language or in using language elements in other ways that are not about communication. And this can refer to various linguistic entities. So, for example, understanding that a word is a thing is a meta-linguistic ability. The linguistic ability, which a 3-year-old has, is to be able to say table to refer to a table or banana to refer to a banana. So these are things, and the 3-year-old understands perfectly how to communicate about them. But the fact that the word table or the word banana are words, so they're entities, they're things one can think about and maybe even play with, is not something that we necessarily expect a 3-year-old to understand. So the concept of a word, the concept of a sentence, and much more the concept of a speech sound are concepts of linguistic elements that young children do not yet possess, but develop gradually after they have acquired the communicative use of their language. This is a major conceptual achievement. It is no small feat. To think about words and word parts as things requires one to turn their attention away from the objects in the world and away from using language to communicate about the world and about one's needs. And instead, think about these linguistic objects as things. Turn attention inward and focus on these as if they were things. So it is not surprising that it takes a while before children can develop this understanding. In particular, when we talk about awareness of phonology or phonological awareness, the word awareness means realization, means conscious knowledge or deliberate manipulation. So being aware of something. Being aware of what? Well, phonological refers to the structure of speech sounds. So phonological awareness is a metalinguistic skill that refers to speech sounds and their structure. In order to have phonological awareness, one must first be able to understand that words are things that are composed of smaller parts. So treat words as objects with parts. Focus on the composition of these meaningless parts. So words have meanings, they refer to things, but speech sounds don't. So it's not enough to realize that words have parts, but you also should be able to refer to these parts without any external semantic support from meanings, and then attend to these parts and consciously manipulate them at the highest level of phonological awareness. Again, it's not surprising that this major cognitive achievement does not come naturally or easily at young ages. Why do we need phonological awareness? Well, why would we need any awareness? If you recall, a writing system is a systematic visual representation of phonological elements, among other language elements or other language properties. But mostly, a writing system visually represents phonological elements. So in order to be able to learn this representation, this visual mapping, you need to be able to access these elements. How can you learn what a visual symbol refers to if that thing it refers to is not in your awareness? In alphabetic orthographies, the elements are typically phonemes. That's what alphabet means, that letters or letter combinations map onto phonemes. So, as an example, you need to realize that the word milk is a thing, it has parts, and one of these parts is e. And if you understand that, then it makes sense to learn that a particular visual shape, this one, the letter e, represents this sound. So before you can learn the connection from this thing to this thing and backwards, you must be able to have this thing into your thoughts. So you must be able to perform this phonological awareness task. What kinds of phonological awareness skills are there? What kinds of things can you do if you have good phonological awareness? Well, the simplest thing that preschoolers can do is matching. Matching, for example, would be being able to tell that melk and mur have the same sound in the beginning. That would be a matching. But milk and äpple don't have the same first sound. Isolation would be to be able to say that the first sound of milk is m. This is more than being able to compare it. Now you have to take it out and say it. And segmentation is being able to say all the sounds. So if I say milk, that you are able to say m, e, l. This is fairly difficult, much more difficult than matching. And then blending. Blending is the opposite of segmentation. Blending is being able to go from a sequence such as m, e, l, to the word milk. This is even more demanding, and it is actually a major milestone in learning to read. Learning to read does not only require learning the sounds of letters, it also requires being able to pull together the sounds of letters into a whole word, which often does not sound exactly like the sequence of the letter sounds. So m, e, l, k, milk are not identical, and going from the former to the latter is quite demanding for a young child. And finally, there are even more demanding tasks, such as deletion. So what is milk without m? This is a quite difficult task that develops more slowly and usually develops with reading experience after reading instruction has begun. Other tasks that are demanding include spoonerisms, which involves exchange of phonemes among words. For example, instead of saying good morning, say mood morning. Tests of phonological awareness tap these kinds of skills. There are tests of rhyming, which is whether two words can form a poem, which is one way of assessing the child's ability to see similarity in words that have no similarity in meaning. So if someone can do rhyming, it means that they can compare words not on the basis of what they mean. So this is evidence for non-communicative use of language objects. And that's one reason rhyming is used very often in preschool. At the syllable level, we have syllabic awareness. Syllables are phonological elements, so awareness of syllables is one kind of phonological awareness. Tests that examine syllabic awareness can include the requirement to count syllables, to say if two syllables are the same or different, or syllables within words if two words begin with the same syllable or not, or end with the same syllable, the ability to remove a syllable from a word, to segment a word into syllables or to blend syllables into words. Awareness at the syllable level is much easier than awareness at the phoneme level and is acquired earlier. So children can do syllabic awareness tasks successfully well before they can do phonemic awareness tasks. Phonemes, of course, are also phonological elements, and so awareness of phonemes is another kind of phonological awareness. That's called phonemic awareness. And similar things can be done with phonemes. So tests of phonemic awareness can be about counting phonemes, deciding if two phonemes are the same or different, or if words begin or end with the same phoneme, the ability to blend or segment phonemes, to delete phonemes, and to exchange phonemes. There is a long developmental sequence from preschool through the early elementary grades in which phonological awareness skills develop and improve. So these different tests are appropriate for different ages or different developmental data points. And as children learn to read, their phonological awareness skills also greatly improve. So some of these tests that are listed here can be used with preschoolers, but some others would be way too difficult, actually impossible to perform by children who have not yet begun to learn to read. And now the most important thing of all, which you really need to keep in mind. Phonological awareness is a strictly oral construct. It has nothing to do with writing. Phonological awareness is about realizing that words are things with parts, so that speech sounds exist and are put together to form words, and concerns the ability to be aware of them, to think about them, to focus your attention on them, and to consciously manipulate them. So all of that is about spoken words. All phonological awareness tests are strictly oral tests. There is no writing involved in any phonological awareness test. If there is any image, it is pictures, and pictures are sometimes used with younger children so that they can remember the words without having to tax their memory. So we can test their phonological awareness independently of their ability to remember the words that we told them. But there aren't any letters ever in a phonological awareness test. If there are letters, it is not a phonological awareness test. So phonological awareness is about the speech sounds of one's spoken language. Phonological awareness is not about letter sounds. So again, phonological awareness has nothing to do with letters. This is a very important point because phonological awareness is absolutely essential for learning to read. And phonological awareness difficulties are often limited in children with reading difficulties, and they need to be assessed and they need to be improved before reading improvements can occur. So it's very important to understand that phonological awareness is a strictly oral construct that has nothing to do with letters or letter sounds. And in particular, do not confuse phonological awareness with phonics. Phonics is an educational approach to reading, which is about teaching the letter sounds. So teaching the mappings from letters to sounds, which is what we do in teaching children to read. But that's not phonological awareness. Phonological awareness must develop to some extent before phonics can work. So please do not forget that phonological awareness is strictly about realizing elements in spoken language and test it with spoken language only.